So, when Mr. Murray asked if I wanted to talk for a co-teacher training, he asked me what I wanted to talk about. And so the one thing that kept coming under my mind and heart was advocating for our children. And when I think of advocating, it sounds funny because like when we did foster care, we took a whole class for 2 days on just how to advocate for your foster care children, fighting the school system in order to get what the services you need. They even gave us instruction on how you need to bring in this law and present it to your school because they do not want to give you those services you need. Well, obviously we don't have that problem here today. But what I have seen is, with my exposure on the board and things that I've done, is we as parents, all of what we just said, our students are completely unique and different. And one of the beautiful things about being in a small school and a hybrid model school is we have more opportunities to make our kids' education totally unique to our children. It doesn't have to be, okay, well, my kid is in this third grade class and all the third graders just do this and this is our only option, this is what we do. Being both in a hybrid model where we have them 2 days a week to enrich them, we have the ability to customize it to their hearts and interests. But even when they get older, I'm seeing, I've just had a lot of experience on how to make your child's education speak to their heart. We are a small school, we are a young school, we are growing, we need to improve in some areas, but it doesn't mean we can't bring other things in to make our kids' education more full, and that comes from advocating for our specific children, because we know we love our teachers and they love our kids, but really it's only us as parents and as co-teachers, we get to see where their hearts are. We get to see those little glimmers of where we think the Lord is leading our children to do different things. So I don't feel like I need to go into my spiel on who I am to you guys. I feel like you guys pretty much know. But yeah, so we have the 3 boys. One's going to be 13 and an 8th grader. Brody's going to be a senior, and JD is going to also be a senior, but he is not going to be a Trinity this year. And so I homeschooled all of our boys up until 2019 when we sent them to Trinity. I just was really passionate about their homeschooling. I first felt called in college to homeschool. I was a very rebellious young person, and by the time I got to high school and that full rebellion kicked in, I really didn't care what my parents had to say about it, and so I pushed back very hard. And when I got older, I thought to myself, okay, if I'm going to have children like me, which I did, how can I improve that? What can my parents have done to point me in a better direction and to that I would have heard them? And really the only way I can think of is that they had built that relationship when they were younger. And I really couldn't reconcile how I could have gone to school all day and then did my homework and done activities and have that relationship built with my parents. Weekends were busy and we just didn't have that time. And my dad worked a lot and was worked all through Saturday. So anyway, that was kind of what spurred on my desire to homeschool. But I was never a homeschool is the only option. I recognized that my kids would be totally different, and so every year we pray about whether or not I should homeschool. And for years, I felt like the answer was yes, that we were supposed to homeschool. I got a lot of pushback from a lot of different directions, but I was still very passionate, and that stubbornness kicked in as beneficial at that point, and I stuck my ground. And then we learned about Trinity in 2017 from the Hesses, actually, and I was really intrigued, but it wasn't for us at that time. And again, in 2018, but in 2019, really felt like, okay, I think this is where God wants us to go. We had 3 kids, totally different, like our siblings. So Olin was going into 5th grade, he struggled with reading, he has dyslexia, and we had hired people to help, and I'm like, all right, I need more help. I need more of a structured, professional teaching environment. But my heart kind of broke giving up my time with him. So the hybrid model was beautiful because I still had 1 full day a week without the older kids that I could dedicate just to him. And I was his primary, or I was his homeschool teacher on Fridays too. JD, on the other hand, was too smart for his own good. He'd had me as his teacher his entire life, and he needed some men, and he needed experts in their field teaching him. He needed people like Mrs. Johnson, who brought in the 30 years experience at Wrigley and could make it applicable in the science class. And he needed just those other people that could come in and lead and guide him, where he wasn't only being taught by excuse me, sorry. And then my dad had been his math teacher, and since my dad was basically fired from his homeschooling math job, he came here and taught for a couple of years and did that upper school with them. And then we had Brody, who we had adopted at 11. He had a second grade education at most, and he came in with no English and very little skills. And we had homeschooled and had tutors, dealt with a lot of trauma and all that stuff. And he had reached a point where we felt like he really needed to have a positive institutional experience. China, horrible. Classrooms, teachers, students, he was really at the bottom of the barrel in every dynamic there. And so he really needed to be able to go in some place where he could feel safe and loved and thrive in an institution. And we knew the public schools were not going to be that answer. Yet he needed to step out of only being taught at home and have that positive experience. So again, Trinity could be more answer for us on that. And I feel like you guys have pretty much the know that we are small, and we are young, we are growing, we are learning, we make mistakes. We've tried to take the best from all these different places and figure out how they fit in here. We're in a unique spot, being in such an ag community and being so remote that we can't be just like other places. There's other classical schools that have a ton more homework than us, and some classical schools that have a lot less. And yet we have to find out where we are in the middle. And we've definitely had our growing pains, as I'm sure you guys have experienced yourselves, because you guys have been here, you're not new. But when new teachers decide, okay, this curriculum doesn't work, or this program doesn't work, we need to change and grow. And two, like our Gabe was the upper level class all by himself for all those years. So obviously teaching one kid in one grade is different than teaching 10 kids in one grade. And so we're continually having to change and adapt. And honestly, our upper school kids are just guinea pigs. We are throwing stuff at them, seeing what sticks, and working that with about integrated education. But in that leaves a lot of open gaps for advocating for their special needs. Because even though, I'm a huge supporter of the school, obviously, I'm completely dedicated to it. At the same time, I have to be an advocate for my kid. I have to make sure they're getting what they need, not just letting them, not that Trinity's letting them fall through the cracks, but just making sure they have those extra pieces that fill their heart, and they're getting those extra pieces that they need as they go. And as we go on, things that are required now won't always be required. Debate team is a great example of this, where for our first year, it was the pilot program. We had to make it required because then the kids had done it and nobody wanted to do it. And everybody's kind of like, no thanks. And now we've done it. Last year we were required, everybody's required to take debates as a high school credit, but you don't necessarily have to be on the debate team. But last year they were required to go one-to-one debate off. I can't remember how they went. Other states and stuff. And with this year, because now they have generated interest, so that was another thing. I was just encouraging parents that when, if you are frustrated that things are required, they may not always be required as we are able to get these programs off the ground. But, like I said, in the midst of all this change and growth and growing needs, we have to be able to advocate for our kids and their passions and their interests to keep their hearts thriving amongst all the change. So, I feel like you guys are aware of our structure, but our structure with dealing with issues, obviously, first we want to go over to our teacher and seek out what they, we'll try to find a solution with our teachers first. Then second, this camera's throwing me out. Sorry, I don't think it was as far as your waves. What am I throwing here that they don't need to hear that? I need to be on there. He can edit it. So first we need to approach our teacher. Then we also have lead teachers now, Mrs. McDowell for grammar and Melissa for the upper school. Go to the lead teacher next, and third address Mr. Murray on those issues. I found myself climbing this ladder a lot our first year, and I was terrified of being a parent. They see the number come up on the screen and be like, oh my gosh, why shouldn't be? And it was also Mr. Murray's first year, and so there was a couple times, kind of embarrassingly, things were happening, and my dad was teaching, and maybe he got frustrated with something, and I'm a parent, and I'm maybe getting frustrated, and I hear other parents being frustrated, and Mr. Murray's finding his way, and finally one of the ones I held with the parent manual, and I'm like, I'm reading this, and that's not what we're doing. Can we change this, please? And he did. I will say he's been wonderful to be able to be humble myself. But yes, I was the squeaky wheel for a long time, and I was shocked when he called to see if I would consider being on board. But I said, I was just like, I feel like I'm the one you don't want to hear from. But he was very generous in saying, no, but how do I go to fix it? If parents just talk to other parents, then I can't be better, and the school can't be better, and we can't be better, and we can't serve better. And so he was just really honest and transparent with that, and that really struck me. I was impressed with that. And sometimes just we have random things that we can't foresee as being a problem. One of the issues that I dealt with was Brody had some very specific ugly traumas from his past in China that had caused a lot of disruption in our home and struggles. And by the time he came here, we felt like we were in a decent place with it. And then he was in an ancient literature class that studied one of these, I love old Greek, weird books that had a direct storyline that tapped into his very specific ugly trauma. And I looked at this and I thought, he's gonna have to read it, study it, and discuss it in class. And his heart was just barely holding together from having gone through all this. And so I really struggled with what to do, because I knew Brody didn't want it to be a public issue. He didn't want me calling and telling everybody, the best teachers in the room, we want the other students to know. Because I even said, do you want me to pull you from the class? And he's like, no, because he didn't want him to be made a spectacle of. And I really wrestled through it. And so then I kind of called Mr. Murray, because we didn't have a lead teacher, and I just said, okay, I've got to tell you what's going on. And I got to tell you, this is where his heart is, and this is what's going on. Can we do something? And he was wonderful. Mr. Murray was like, you know what? He prayed about it, and he came back, and he said, and this is one of the God things. I mean, Mr. Murray spent all that time in China, so he's got pieces of the language, but he also has friends and resources. And so he said, tell you what I want to do. He says, I want to pull him for those 3 weeks, and I'm going to teach him and just tell him, I'm going to teach you some specific ancient Chinese stories. And instead of you doing that Greek, I just want to do this with you. So he was able to pull Brody. Brody found it as a privilege. It tapped into his heart, who he was, what he wanted to know. The other students and the other teacher were none the wiser of any of it. And that was one of the beauties of being in a tiny school, a small school, but we were able to make his education totally unique. He would have never gotten that anywhere else. Even a giant, a Christian school that has every club you can be in, that was unique. And I really appreciated that about Trinity. It's one of those things that makes it, what you can do with your education really unique. And so with that, of course, preaching the prayer, show grace with apathy, show patience to the teachers, to the administrator. But don't be afraid to advocate. If you see that gap, if you see that hole, if you see that piece that is missing that your kid's heart needs, speak it and climb up the ladder, whatever you have to do. Because really their hearts should be our first priority over all the rest of it. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the upper level grades. Now, your oldest is sixth grade and fourth. So they're still fairly young. But, and so my qualifier is, by the time your kids are like 2 years in high school, it's gonna look totally different. Olin is 8th grade, and I'm already thinking about, okay, well, the high school is gonna look completely different. The high school will have 40 kids in it by the time Olin gets to be a senior, which is phenomenal. And so it is gonna look very, very different. But that advocating is still gonna be important. And so, so since we aren't able to offer so many opportunities for our kids, it's another gap that we can fill in to make their education really personal and really about who they are. And so I have 3 different things that we can do to kind of accentuate their education. One is alternative programs. There are tons of programs out there. And I think our instinct is to think they can't do it. They can't do it because they're here and they already have this and they already have that. And like, for example, when I heard about the CEO program, that John County CEO, I don't know how familiar you guys are with it, program, one of his best friends, his mom is on the board for it. And I heard of it and it sounded amazing. And basically it's a program where the kids go in from 7:30 to 9 every morning, 5 days a week for an entire school year. So it is an intense program. It's a lot of hours. And they go in and 2 days a week, they learn about being an entrepreneur and what it takes to run a business. And then 2 days a week, they tour local businesses and they get to go in and see and hear the stories and find out how they did it. And then 1 day a week on Friday, the first semester, they work on class business that they put on. And the year, like 1 year, they did an escape room. Last year, they did a battle of bands. And they run this business and they do everything. They promote it, they run it, they get sponsors for it, everything. And then the second semester, they work on their own personal business. So that by the end of that second semester, they actually have a job fair and they promote their own business. They have their business card. And then they have a mentor that walks through them, tries to ask them the right questions, point them in the right direction. And so it's a really phenomenal program and kids from all over the county do it. But like, some days they drive to Colchester. Like, so for part of the year they have to drive to Colchester. Part of the year they drive to West Prairie. Part of the year they drive to Macomb. Part of the year they drive to Bushnell. Bushnell's great for us because it's 3 miles away. But Colchester's not. And going from Bushnell to Colchester to industry, that means JD wasn't even going to show up for class on, for a part of the year until like 9:35. And so, unfortunately, he can't do this. He can't participate in this. But to Mr. Murray and told him about it and like, this taps into JD's heart. I love JD's my kid. That kid, there's not much of Trinity that gets to Mark's heart. I mean, he is gritty, dirty, mechanical, greasy, all that stuff. Classical literature, Oliver Twist, Shakespeare, not in his wheelhouse. Now, he got a great education there and wonderful things. He learned how to he did persuasive speech, which was really good, but I don't know how much the teachers appreciated it. Like, Mr. Brooks apparently made a comment in one of his classes that he thought it was okay for Christians to have tattoos. Fine. Well, JD had to do a persuasive speech, and he knew Mr. Brooks was going to be grading it. So he did his persuasive speech on why Christians shouldn't have tattoos. Doesn't believe that, but he decided to take the counter argument just to be. But he learned how to take an argument, research it, formulate it, make it persuasive, and he got an A. And so, like I said, he learned a great thing, but that was about, the rest of the stuff, it just didn't spur his heart on. And a new CEO would really, and he did. Loved it. It really spurred his heart on. So I was able to present to Mr. Murray. We were able to figure out a way to reschedule his day so he could do it. And he did it, loved it. And not only that, CEO came and did a presentation at Trinity for upcoming students. And so now Emma Taylor's doing it this year. And so those are the kinds of things that don't resist when you hear these opportunities. We're small enough, we can make, not always, it's not a guarantee, but we can make those choices to do that and find those programs. So then dual credit is the big thing right now. I'm not sure, I'm sure you know quite a bit from John on the board. But so this year we're having our first dual credit class, and I think Bernie might be involved in it. But they're doing the government class, but basically we're working with Carl Sandburg, and we have a teacher with a master's that Carl Sandburg can advocate or can accredit our classes. So we're doing it for civics. We're wanting to expand it for other things. And what a really neat story was, so Carl Sandburg had the text and gave it to Mr. Adams and said, okay, this is the text we want you to use, and the board had to approve it. And Mr. Adams said, clearly, this text teaches things that are not our core values. They get into all kinds of garbage that, but he's like, but I'll teach the contrary, I'll try to do this, or we could just not teach that part, not tell them. And so it was presented to the board, and the board's like, we can't do this. I mean, it is straight out of our governance that we will not have textbooks. Even if I love the idea of him taking something like that and teaching contrary, because those kids are going to go to college and they're going to have to do that. But it wasn't in our governance. I mean, it just clearly wasn't. So we voted it down, and we said, no, we can't do this. So then Mr. Adams went back to Carl Sandburg and said, I'm sorry, this is our governance. We cannot teach out of any textbook. She's like, oh, well, that's okay. You pick your book, and you make your class, and we'll credit it for you. And so it was a huge blessing because, all of us kind of felt bad at the board meeting. I want the dual credit, but it's not going to happen. But they came back, and they're super excited to continue doing it with us. So it looks like by the time your kids are that age, we will have more of those opportunities. However, until this last year when I was doing stuff with G and Brody and looking at schools, I didn't realize almost every single college has online courses that you can take. And a lot of them, if you take a course with them online before you come in as a freshman, they'll take huge chunks of money off your tuition. We had one school that we looked at, an awesome school, and they said, oh yeah, if you just do one dual credit class online before you come in as an incoming freshman, you automatically get $3,000 off your tuition every year. So that's not bad. I mean, every little bit helps with these schools. And so then I was able to take that sheet and bring it to Mr. Murray and say, okay, what will you accept? And so if your kids are college bound and are of that mindset, start seeking that out like when they're a sophomore and start looking at how you can customize. Because we have so many different, we have so many different classes here, and ag, general ed, elective type classes. Well, they don't have to take that elective. They can take one of these instead. And so like Jay could, for what I thought he was going to do credit, he could have taken flight school as a dual credit class. And that would have tapped into his heart, tapped into what he wanted. He came from a Christian school, so Trinity was like, no, it's flight, ground school, no big deal. And so they were going to be able to accredit that. And so he would have gotten credit at Trinity, and he would have gotten his college credits. Like I said, there's a lot of those out there now. So that's another way that you can kind of customize your kids' education. Even though Trinity doesn't specifically offer all of those, we can offer them the computer space to do the online courses. And then kind of the last one is admittedly the one that is the most time consuming for us as teachers. But you can create your own classes. So I've talked to Mr. Murray about this a lot, that we have parents that, my kid, we really gotta get ag at Trinity, or we really gotta get this at Trinity. And we've looked into some of those options, but our resources are limited. And if we only have a couple kids, we can't hire a whole new teacher to do a specialized elective. But Trinity is open to you creating a class or doing a work study and saying, okay, hey, my student's gonna do this, and this is the curriculum we're going to set up with it, and these are the things that we want to accomplish. Will Trinity accept this, or how can we customize this to make it work and do it as an alternative to something that Trinity offers? So my personal example of this is Brody. So Brody came to us with only Chinese, and we really felt before he even came very strongly that we wanted him to keep his first language, and we just felt Lord, and looking back on it, the Lord clearly wants him to do something in the Chinese community because it is his passion and his heart. Some adopted kids come and they don't have anything to do with their first language. Brody is not that way. He is prone to it. And in fact, last year, you guys know 5 minutes. Brody taught him Chinese once a week. They would get together and they had their flashcards. So it was a beautiful, again, even for Ivan, was starting to be really curious about his Chinese heritage, even though he had no knowledge or memory of China at all. But then Brody was able to teach him Chinese like 4 days a week. And so it was a really neat opportunity, again, being in a small school, they were able to customize it for him, and then Brody was able to affirm it. But so Brody came, and so we kept his Chinese going with instructors, and then he came to and they had to learn English, and they came to Trinity and had to learn Latin. And then coming into his junior year, they're going, okay, now it's time for him to learn a foreign language. I'm like, are you kidding? This is number 4. We're done. And so at this point, I was like, and I told Miss Murray, I said, we're a little tapped here. We already got so many. So what I was able to do is I was able to go to the Chinese tutor that worked with him once a week on FaceTime. I said, hey, would you be willing to do it if it was a more formalized class, do grades and turn it in? And she said, yeah, absolutely, I'll do that. And so we found a curriculum that, that we liked. I was able to make a daily lesson plan. And so then last year, Brody was able to take Chinese for his foreign language, which was great because now he can use it to test out a college credit or a college requirement for him. And he was able to continue it. Now it was a lot of work for me to write the lesson plans and make the check boxes and make sure the teacher did it, and we paid for her instruction. It's very inexpensive. So it is work, but practice that Brody's able to take, and so we're doing that again this year. That he's able to take Chinese, and we've already got his time period set aside during school where he will have that study hall 4 days a week where he can do that work right here at school and do something close to his art and personalized education. And again, it sounds overwhelming and daunting, but God can put it together if there's something like that. And if there's other other parents, good teachers that also have that same passion, hold it together, and we can do it together. And we don't have it yet. There is a wonderful workshop here. We don't like that part of the building. I kind of wanted too much to really have it, but we are going to grow and expand. But some of this stuff is going to start with parents creating programs and making it. And ultimately, when you're advocating for your child's heart, and at some point, you may have to decide that Trinity is not a fit for every single child. This was a really hard goal for me to swallow. So JD is not coming back this year. He is going to be homeschooled, and he's gonna work. But he grew this huge passion for welding and fabricating and doing an entrepreneurial business and doing all that stuff. And his future did require what Trinity was going to require. And in fact, it just pained his heart because he just didn't feel like he fit. And some of that's there for sure. But I had to step back and go, okay, I had this issue. He's unhappy. Things are not working. His heart's over here. My heart's over here. I love Trinity. How are we going to make this all fit? And we did try to look at different online classes that he can meld together. We couldn't go part-time, well, not really, because this class is required at the beginning of the day, and this class is required at the end of the day, so he really can't do that. He can drive back and forth and only take some of the classes. Well, gas prices what they are, and it's just like, and so finally, it just made it very clear. Like, we had one teacher from here, and we had our pastor that was like, we think he was going to consider and being the chairman of the board and having to pull my kid from the first graduating class ever, and he's a third of the graduating class. I realized how much I had to be humble and how much I lean on what I want for my kids, what I want them to look like. I want my Christian child to look like this, and to talk like this, and to be affirmed like this, and have accolades like this, and recognized like this, where it hurts me. Neither one of you were in Claire's thing this morning. But she was talking about this about being no longer doing this and all that stuff. And it brought back the report card, and I started adding the report card on those things